chicken. I'm your guy.
Blinking.
I'll have what Joseph's has.
Look, somebody's talking about you.
This is what we call the voice of God.
Popping.
Everybody just gets to focus on you.
Grab me.
Probably not the best thing for an introvert.
I'm asking for you.
Well, I like a good chicken sandwich.
Touch me. Hi, David. Comment.
Oh my God.
Like.
You're actually an identical twin.
Push.
Maybe I'll just ask Julie to talk about what it is to be
No.
an identical twin.
Pick me up.
No, you didn't.
Shouting.
Surprise! Jeremiah, just hang on a second. I just got a text.
There's an edit for your new opening, Joseph.
I feel really honored to have been here, man.
By the way, you've done a masterful job. Seriously.
It was such a joy.
Thanks, Joseph. It's an honor.
Good on you. This was a pleasure.
I mean, you are the prime example of how to pivot in this new environment.
I wish everybody gets an opportunity to interact with Joseph Jaffe and Corona TV.
Who needs Cameo when I've got my own personal Cameo? Well, hello, everybody. I've just noticed in that intro, which I've never noticed before, that there were some butt ugly shirts that I was wearing. Maybe I need to do that more often. I think the inspiration actually comes from Madiba himself, Nelson Mandela, who could wear any shirt, no matter how ugly, and he could pull it off because he was just a beautiful, beautiful man. Well, I am in the furniture factory right now. I'm making my own furniture. Why am I making my own furniture? Is it a masterclass that I attended, or will be revealed when I bring on my guests? But first and foremost, it is National Maple Syrup Day. And I would be remiss, in fact, I would be in big trouble if I didn't acknowledge Vermont maple syrup in honor of Mr. Bob Farnham. And we will see whether he's watching or not. If he isn't watching, I'll just punish him and never mention any Vermont company or small business again. So screw you, Ben and Jerry. Bob Farnham, save your entire state right now by acknowledging, hopefully you are out there. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. So this week's guest today is Farrah Bostic. And tomorrow, David Meerman Scott, Mark Schaefer, Ian Pritchard, Faith James, and Kuda Biza. Farrah is the founder and head of research and strategy at The Difference Engine. And I'm so excited to bring on. In fact, I decided, let's see if I can do this properly. We are on air, sure. We are live on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Periscope, which, by the way, is closing down. I just saw that the other day, and everything is moving over or back to Twitter. But I decided that, Farrah's company is called The Difference Engine. So, this is not the best. I need to get a better logo, but you can just see the little star of The Difference Engine. Let's see what happens if I go back. There you go. Today's show is brought to you by The Difference Engine. And so that will be the logo that you see in front of you throughout the day. Well, let's do birthdays. Who is celebrating birthdays? Pamela Rosenthal, Fred Kessler, Mr. Brian Morrissey. Sorry, Brian, for cutting you off. Jill Griffin Hughes, and my good friend Jennifer Kavanaugh, who is absolutely crushing it, and I mean crushing it, running marketing for the Philadelphia Eagles. So hi, Jen. Hope you are watching the show today. And then on LinkedIn, there's Rick Herring. There is Wayne Fisser. I thought there was a previous guest who'd been on the show. Let's go back and see. Nope, I don't see anyone who's been on the show. But whomever you are, wherever you are, whether you are snowed in, snowed under in the Northeast, or maybe enjoying some warmer temperatures, hopefully you feel warm inside with a greeting, with a wish coming to you from Corona TV. Well, it's time for our seated soliloquy, and our seated soliloquy today is just called research and all relating things associated with it. On this show, today's show, Farrah and I are going to talk about truth and market research, which I guess are two words like social and media, or oil and water. As a former strategic planner, my raison d'être is all about consumer insights, identifying them, uncovering them, celebrating them. Big ideas that come from these nuggets or needles in a haystack of noise, status quo, or vanilla sameness That is our art. That is our craft. Consumer insights are also referred to as consumer truths, but therein lies the rub. Are they in fact true at all? Are consumers telling us what we want to hear or what we need to hear? Perhaps part of the problem is how we've gone about extracting these truths. The beleaguered focus group with one-way mirrors that seems to visualize more of an interrogation than an ethnographic exploration. From the way we've determined the price of 30-second spots, through consumers keeping diaries of their watching habits, to interrupting their family meals with phone calls, our system of uncovering insights is both antiquated and broken. Sure, there's the mighty monkey, Survey Monkey that is. No doubt there are some amazing solutions that leverage digital platforms and technologies. There's actually a company called Current, that's CURRNT, which is an HMS Beagle client that truly they bring a revolutionary new approach to qualitative research, offering what is essentially current or fresh, real-time expertise. And I would be remiss if I didn't touch on social media itself, and what I used to refer to as the world's greatest focus group, blogs. But these days, in the wake of the death of blogs, the likes of Facebook and surprisingly so, still Twitter. Capitalizing on top of this are companies that do pretty advanced social listening and engagement. Throw in artificial intelligence and you have a bingo. But are any of these getting us closer to the truth? Accurate reflections of sentiment, intent, and actual execution or follow through? Maybe, maybe not. For me, nothing beats talking to real people, face to face, one to one, no filters, mirrors, or barriers. It's a lean startup best practice. Now, if 2020 has given us nothing else, it has provided us with a pretty comfortable, reliable, and direct connection to our consumers via virtual video and, I suppose, streaming. Coupled with our superpower of curiosity and the ability to ask the right questions or golden questions, it may very well bring us closer to the kinds of truths that can move mountains, build brands, and grow sustainable businesses that are not built to suck. Well, I really am curious to find out what Farrah has to say. Does she agree? Does she disagree? Is she going to push back, or how would she riff and ultimately build on that? Let me tell you a little bit about her as I bring her on. Farrah Bostic helps business leaders make big decisions. She was educated as a journalist, copyright, and lawyer, and then became a strategist and design researcher, mostly by trial and error. According to Farrah, she's a reasonably friendly pain in the ass. She was a group planning director at Digitas, led the consumer immersion practice at Ipsos, led the innovation practice at Hall & Partners, and developed skills as a strategist at Mad Dogs and Englishmen and TBWA Day in Los Angeles, and two phenomenal agencies. But her company right now, even better. Her company is called The Difference Engine, and they work with clients as diverse as eBay, JetBlue, NBC News, Madison Square Garden Group, the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times, Google, Pearson, and the Society of Digital Agencies, among many others. She knows her stuff. She is my guest today. Let's bring her on. Welcome to the show, Farrah.
Hey, Joe. How are you doing?
You know how I realize there's something very surreal about this, because we know each other mainly through the Beancast and through It's of the Mind. So now
Yes.
it's a very different medium, and there's so many things that are different about this. One is, I am the host as opposed to the guest. This is very much one-on-one, and it's visual and it's video based. But other than that, it's exactly the same.
Other than that, yeah, totally, totally the same. Yeah, no, I think somehow in my mind, while knowing, of course, that this is a video-based show, I still in my head was like, it's a podcast. Do I have to get dressed? And then it was like, oh, maybe I should. Maybe I should brush my hair. That was the most important decision of the morning.
And did you?
I did brush my hair.
Well, then that's
Only for you.
well, that's good. I didn't. I basically had, I've probably saved $14,000 on hair gel since. So,
Yes.
so there's that. But getting a very short haircut, I think counts. One of the things strategically that I wanted to do with the show, and we'll see where it goes and evolves, as the show evolves, was even the shirt I'm wearing today. I didn't want to purposefully dress up and create something that was, I don't know, like old school or, I don't know, so 2019. And it's been an interesting journey. Sometimes I get a little bit too casual. And on one occasion I wore a tie, but other than that, I wanted it to be just very natural. So if you're being natural today, then you're in the right place at the right time.
Well, I decided not to go too easy on it because right before this, my dog decided to run off into the woods after the scent of deer. And so I had to throw on a coat and run out after him. And I haven't been running pretty much since the pandemic began. So picking a snowy day, running through slush and underbrush and trees to find a wayward Irish setter is how I started the day. So I was very sweaty and gross. Trust me, it's better this way that I bothered to kind of get a little bit nicer than normal because I was so much worse off than normal to start with.
I feel that instead of ending the show with a corona question, let's just ask it right now. How have you kept physically and or mentally fit during 2020, Farrah?
So one way is chasing the dog. But I think it's actually been a real kind of interesting fits and starts kind of year for that. But I think the one thing I did commit to was, I think after years of just sort of, working by myself, for myself, being in a kind of remote work way for years as a practitioner, I had this kind of wake up call earlier in the spring or early summer, I guess, where I suddenly realized that I really just was so disconnected from my body that was the thing I wanted. Not necessarily to get in shape or whatever, but to just feel like I know where my body is moving in space and why it's moving the way it's moving and why I get a sore neck sometimes or whatever. And so I actually started working with a physical therapist that I knew from Brooklyn who'd moved down to Virginia but kept her license in New York. We've been doing remote health, PT sessions once a week. And that's probably been like the most useful thing on the physical side. It's just, it's not, high intensity stuff. It's just a lot of like getting a mental map of how my body works. So that's been one thing. Down to I now have like an anatomy app on my iPad. And when she starts talking about, the sacroiliac joint, I go, hang on, and open up the anatomy app so I can get a visual of what that means.
I actually know where the sacroiliac joint is.
Yes. Well, it's right.
I've been having issues with it lately.
Oh, interesting. We can talk about foam rolling exercises that can help with that.
I'm feeling disconnected to my body right now.
Yes. Well, it happens, I think, from sitting a lot, to be honest. And then the other thing I've been doing is actually coming back into something like a writing practice. As you said in the intro, I started out, I have a journalism degree. I was a copywriter to begin with. And I used to just sort of write because, and lately it's really been like, unless a client's asking for it, or I need to market the business, or I have to prepare a presentation, I don't write. And so I've been trying to kind of reconnect to just doing that for pleasure. So I've also been doing a really great sort of writing circle 3 times a week with a woman named Lisa Weinert. It's called Narrative Healing Labs. It's lovely. We just have kind of guided writing practice and no one reads anything. There's no feedback. It's just, again, it's a little bit of meditation at the start, getting into your body, and then just writing for about 45 minutes. And it's lovely. So those are my 2 things that I've been trying to do. I don't know how much they're working, but I feel like progress is being made.
Well, I've never actually heard that idea before, that concept of being disconnected from your body. And I think I'm intrigued to learn more, because I think clearly the implication is that you're not in sync, and that every ache and pain and ailment is actually in your control, or could be, I guess, in your control. I mean, certainly there's meditation, there are so many different ways. There's acupuncture, there's understanding energy, as well. And I think it's probably all interconnected. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think maybe it's something that's more present for me because as a kid, I did like gymnastics and swimming and things that were very kind of technique heavy. And you had to really be able to say, I can be doing all these other things and point my toes and be able to map all of that in my mind at the same time. And I was talking, this is an interesting side story. I was talking to a roboticist actually about how what they were trying to teach robots in order to do things like jump and run and be able to recover if you poke it with a stick while they're in motion is what humans kind of do sort of naturally unless you have an injury or unless you kind of stop using your body parts. And it's called proprioception. It's literally just your body's map of, or your brain's map of your body in space. And teaching robots to have proprioception is a big part of what they're doing with these kind of scary looking robots you see coming out of MIT. But that idea was like, oh, that's interesting, because I'd literally had an injury several years ago where Gopi, my physical therapist, was like, yeah, you've sort of forgotten about your left glute. Like your brain isn't really sure where that lives anymore, and we have to wake that part of your brain back up.
Proprioception. I mean, that's a world first on Corona TV. I don't even know if that's correct the way I spelled it, but wow. I suppose without exactly without that, yeah. The robot ends up dancing like Elaine Bennis or Donald Trump, one of the two, I guess. But
yeah, I mean, the great example the roboticist gave me was when someone hands you a cup of coffee, your brain is able to tell your hand to do this gesture and sort of approximate, the diameter of the cup, and also to expect a certain kind of weight because there's coffee in it. And so like that ability to do stuff is really important for a robot. You hand them a cup of coffee and they squeeze too hard, they break the whole thing, right? They don't squeeze hard enough, they drop it. And so we just sort of learn naturally how to do that. Our brains are built for that, but you have to build brains when you're building robots. So how do you build the brain to know how to anticipate those kinds of things? Anyway.
Chris Aaron says agile exercise, lean training. So definitely playing on top of the metaphor. And Seth Spark says proprioception sounds like it would be my transformer name.
It's a good one.
Back off proprioception. Tom Morris says I can't even say it. It sounds like papaya. Like Gray's papaya plays a major role in my Egyptian novels. So Tom has written novels on Egyptian novels because, I mean, who hasn't, right? Have you written an Egyptian novel, Farrah?
Not recently. No, I have not.
But the day is young. Now, I asked you about exercise and physical fitness, running after dogs. Here's something else that you've been doing. In fact, a very interesting, you've definitely made me work hard because I've had to do a lot of research to find out about certain things. Like, for example, what a nuthatch is. So this year you rescued a frog from your pool, a juvenile turkey from your yard, and therefore a dog, and a nuthatch that flew into your front. Is there anything you can't do, Farrah?
Probably, but I haven't encountered it yet. Don't ask me to perform brain surgery. That would probably be bad. But yes, we had we live in the woods out on the east end of Long Island, and so there are families of turkeys that come through the woods behind our house, and every once in a while they get kind of separated on the wrong side of the fence, and the younger ones are not quite so sure how to get back over the fence to get back to mom and dad. And so I spent a few minutes sort of strategically chasing a turkey and opening up the totally shoddy fence that we obviously have so that he could figure out how to get back underneath it. We had a frog that got stuck on one of our pool floats this summer. And so we helped him out and he sort of rested for a long time before he hopped away. And then the morning of election day, I think, is when the nuthatch flew into the window and I was just like, not today. So it was just stunned lying on the deck, and I went out and put him in a shoebox and brought him inside. And apparently that's what you're supposed to do. Bring them inside, put them someplace sort of dark but ventilated, let them collect themselves. And you check on him every few minutes or so. After about 10, 15 minutes, he was ready to go back into the trees with his friends. But it was just very important to me that this bird not die on my front step on election day.
So
It seemed like it would be a bad omen.
Obviously many stories of animals living in the woods. Have you encountered a scary animal, a predator,
Not really. This part of the world seems to be, we have too many deer. We have lots and lots of turkeys. They had actually kind of died out, the wild turkeys here, until someone reintroduced them with turkeys from, I think, Western Pennsylvania. And so now we have a huge population of wild turkeys. I have seen a fox once. We have seen a possum once. There are raccoons that come and help themselves to our compost bins.
You know, that sounds like Westport, Connecticut, which I'm beginning to wonder if I live in the woods now, because apparently I do. There was
it was the woods once.
sightings. I haven't seen one. Coyotes. It's dangerous living in suburbia.
Yes. There don't seem to be many of the predators left out here. I have friends who live, up in the Hudson River Valley, and they have bears, but we don't have that here.
Now, obviously, you can see that I'm in a factory of sorts. You've done something else, and I'm not sure if actually this is, as I was, trolling is such an ugly word, but let's just say, as I was viewing your private Instagram feed, I happened to notice this wonderful collection of furniture you've been making. Is this a COVID thing, or is it just and why are you making furniture? You know that we have Wayfair and IKEA now,
right? So is it a COVID thing? It's a little bit a COVID thing, mostly just because we're home all the time. It's also a little bit, I'm from Portland, Oregon originally. And so often my answer to why do you do these DIY projects is I'm from Oregon. I think there's kind of a tendency to, I'll just do it myself. So this project happened because the house that we're in, we bought a few years ago. It's this lovely kind of early 80s post-modern style. So it's very open plan and no built-in storage to speak of. And so we have been having to figure out where do we put books? And so there's no kind of natural places to buy prefab bookcases and just stick them against a wall, because a lot of the walls in our house are actually glass sliding doors. So that doesn't work. And finally, I was sort of staring into space and thought, well, what if there was sort of a sofa table that kind of wrapped around two sides of the sofa along the arm and along the back, and they were shelves. And maybe the one that goes along the arm, this one actually, on the right hand side, there's a shelf that is on brackets that actually kind of fold up and out, and that's for our projector, which is what we use for watching TV. And so it's all custom designed by me. It's made out of decent quality plywood. It took a couple of months to complete it because I don't have a garage or a workshop, so I had to wait for good weather. But they are now done, and I'm putting the books on tonight because the paint has finally cured. But it was definitely a process of so I want to make bookshelves. How do you do that? Lots of YouTube videos later and trips to the local hardware store. I now know how to do things like drill pocket holes and put wood veneer edging on plywood and all sorts of things. The interesting part of it is the kind of how hard can it be? Oh God, it's really hard sort of transition where you get a little bit overwhelmed. But now I have a really excellent collection of tools, and the guys at the hardware store recognize me. So that feels like an achievement.
Well, I'll tell you, first of all, I think maybe your tagline has to be, if you can dream it, Farrah can build it. So, with apologies to Walt Disney and all of the Disneys, we're going through challenging times right now, but we send our sympathies to the Disneys. I think they're going to be okay. But one person that I think we both know is a gentleman by the name of Doug Yeager. And, I have to get him on the show because he was my creative director when I was running interactive media at Chai Day, and still one of the smartest, most talented creatives I've ever worked with. But what he's doing now, I just look at it from afar, and I think I get it, but I'm not sure I do, but I think I do, it's just unbelievable. He's like created a brand of like, he's created these homes, and he's remodeled the homes and essentially built them, and the whole thing is completely transparent and shared through Instagram in particular and social media. And I think one is called Cook House and the other one's called Zinc House, I think it is.
Yeah, Zinc Cabin.
Zinc Cabin, and it's just brilliant. It's basically taking all of his marketing knowledge and prowess and putting it into something that is tangible, that is real, that is physical. And I mean, I want to, as soon as things get normal, I want to go and hang out at one of them. So just, I mean, very similar in terms of actually going out there and applying those tools of the trade.
One of our projects this summer was to replace a pedestal sink in our master bathroom with a new sink vanity cabinet thing, which required a bit of moving an electrical point so that it would fit. And no project is simple. But the other issue was that the plumbing was sort of mounted low, and it didn't work with the cabinet. The cabinet has a drawer on the bottom of it. And because of Doug and the things that he posts on Instagram stories, I knew how to notch that cabinet so that I could fit the plumbing around it. And I posted a story and tagged him in it. And he was like, this is great. Like doing these things, putting them up on Instagram stories and other people being able to learn from that. And I was like, I literally would not have been able to figure out how to do it without just tearing up that cabinet, but for Doug. So he's an inspiration. He's my Pinterest board. I don't even have a Pinterest board, but he would be it.
He is a human Pinterest board.
Yeah.
Now, earlier when you were talking about what you've been getting up to, you spoke about writing, and you said something that I found very interesting. You said, I'm trying to create practices rather than habits, especially around writing. So can you expand on that? What is a practice versus a habit when it comes to life or when it comes to something like writing, and why is it important?
So I'm not sure that, I think for a lot of people, there probably isn't a meaningful difference between a practice and a habit. I think for me, it's just that habits sound boring. If I'm being just perfectly candid, I think it just sounds dull and repetitive, and a thing that as someone with ADHD, I'm not prone to establish particularly well. But practices feel a little more forgiving, I guess. Like a habit is, every day at 7 o'clock I get up, every day at 7:15 I brush my teeth. That's what that sounds like in my brain. And I'm just never going to be that person, just never going to be that person. And I find it really derailing to set that expectation and not meet it. So this is a bad example because I do brush my teeth, but like 7:15 comes, I don't brush my teeth, and well, that's it. I'll never, wait, try again tomorrow, as opposed to, well, I can just do it now. There's something about the kind of difference of it where, I think about friends, people I know, people I've read. Natalie Goldberg, who's one of my favorite writers about writing, talks a lot about, she's also a Zen practitioner. And so like, it doesn't really matter what time of day you sit and meditate, as long as you sit and meditate. Yes, writing down the bones. I think I mentioned this in the notes, but this is my well-worn 1996 copy that I've had to tape together and wrap in plastic because I'm desperate to keep it exactly the way I want it. But yeah, it's just this idea of this is a thing that I do for myself. It's not an obligation. It is a thing I find time to do every day because it means something to me. It feels like that's kind of what I mean about a practice. And I think it's also that maybe a practice, I'm literally now just thinking this, a practice feels a little bit more wrapped up in how I think of myself and some sort of sense of identity, whereas habits are things that like your parents try to impose on you. And I tend not to do what my parents tell me to do. So I think that's part of why I'm seeking something a bit more forgiving.
I hope my kids aren't watching, but I know my mom is watching, so she's taking notes too. But I do love the idea of a distinction between the habit and the practice. One is push, one is pull, one is love, one is natural, one is forced. You can create a very, very easy list and difference and distinction between the two. And even we were discussing, James Rollins was on the show, and he speaks about how he writes 5 double-spaced full pages every day, and he reads 5 pages every night. But I'm sure he would refer to it as a practice versus a habit. because when you love what you do, it can never be thought of as too rigid and rigorous, as opposed to something, I do this because I do it. I do it because I love it, and I do it out of choice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's right. It is that one of the reasons I stopped being a copywriter was that I found that it was affecting my relationship to writing. It was making me not like writing very much, and so like that is, I think you're right. You've hit on it. It's like, I want to love doing this. I don't want to feel like it's an obligation, and one that's being forced on me from outside. Yeah, I think that's right.
So I want to discuss you, which we have been. I want to continue discussing you, and I think one of the things that I really like about you is I feel like your word choice is very deliberate, and you know, words matter, words count, and for example, even in your company, which by the way is the sponsor of the show, as we all know today. You know, you say with the Difference Engine, we help business leaders like you make big decisions all the time. So I looked at that and I thought to myself, what is a big decision? You know, these aren't just, you've chosen these words very deliberately. And so I'd love for you to define what a big decision is, and why it's important to distinguish between a decision and a big decision.
So I think there's a couple of things, and one is that you know, I think it was kind of a revealing to me over many years of doing this, that's really what my clients were asking of me, was help making these decisions. And that even in what seemed like small questions that they would come to me with, there was underneath it a really kind of critical decision point that they were facing. They wanted an answer to a small question that would help them make it a critical to the business decision. And so examples of this, the one I always kind of invoke is years ago, there was a company called Telenext Media. They had been owned by Procter & Gamble Productions. They produced As the World Turns and Guiding Light. And the guy who ran that company came to our offices when I was at Holland Partners and basically laid it out. Like, these used to be massive ratings television programs, and now the ratings are, you know, comparatively, you know, they're fractional what they used to be. Where'd everybody go? How do we get them back? And then he kind of tacked on this additional question, which just read to me like, should we just fold up our tents and go home? Like, can we get them back? Is it worth it to try? And that was always, you know, it sort of started out with this like, who's our audience now kind of question. But the real issue was, should we even continue to spend money on this? Is it worth being in this space anymore? And that's, I mean, obviously that's an existential question. And ultimately, in the end, one that they had very little control over, because while they owned the shows, they didn't own the network. So CBS made the ultimate decision about whether those shows continued to exist or not. And I think had it been like 4.5, 5 years later, they would have just moved over into streaming. They'd be on Hulu and they'd be perfectly fine. But it was too early for all of that to happen. But I think a lot of the kinds of questions that come up in research are really like, you know, who are our customers? Are we doing, you know, are we connecting with them the way we thought we were connecting with them? How do we connect with them now that things have changed? You know, a lot of the kind of conversations this year obviously have been, what has changed? How much has changed? Is this change permanent? And so how do we adapt as a business? Do we adapt as a business? Are we SOL, as my dad used to say, shit out of luck? And that kind of, those kinds of big questions are kind of underpinning a lot of things. And even if it's as simple as like, which campaign do we run? There's a lot of money on the table for those decisions, and people's careers can be made or broken by those decisions. And so I think part of what we wanted to do, or I wanted to do, was just acknowledge that these decisions are non-trivial. And so some of the decisions are existential about the business. Some of them are just about, you know, major investment. And others are like career makers or breakers for the clients who are asking for the help. And so all of those things matter. And we think that's what we're good at, is helping kind of navigate that process, both by like just consulting and strategizing with clients about how to make these decisions, but also helping them get the information they need to make those decisions, which often they don't have the complete picture. And so we try to help round out the picture for them.
So the big decision and the existential questions, I almost feel like there is something really intriguing to unpack, and maybe one more layer with respect to these existential questions. I think it comes down to this idea of, when do you pull the plug? When do you call time a death? When do you recognize, that you're in, not the frog you saved, but the boiling frog syndrome, where it is death by 1,000 paper cuts, or as I call it, death by 1,000 budget cuts. Are clients even aware of the fact that they are comfortably boiling themselves to death, as it were?
I think aware is a tricky word there. I think they have a, back to the body awareness thing, they have sort of this felt sense that something's wrong, that something's not working the way they expected it to work or the way it used to work. But they have a hard time putting their finger on it. And I think some of that is just kind of a cognitive resistance to, thinking that things have changed so much or that they were wrong in the first case. And so there is a bit of, sort of a guided process that we take clients through of just doing kind of, it's almost like a risk assessment. It's like, what is the investment? What's the ultimate payoff? Can we start assigning probabilities to different kinds of outcomes? What would the necessary conditions be for these things to be a success or a failure? And I'm kind of comfortable with killing darlings if they need to be killed. Stringing them along on life support forever is not great for anybody. It's a drag on the business. It's a drag on the resources and talent of the people who work on those things. I think probably, I think I can claim at least a partial role in helping kill the Microsoft Zune, in favor of things like,
You're the one.
Like
the world owes you a debt.
It was just kind of, this is not, the princess, as they say, is in another castle. You're not going to win here. There were things about it. There were other sort of services and content around it that are definitely worth them keeping. The kind of content store was definitely a place that they could start to play and provide useful services. But the Zune itself, nobody needed that. Yeah. Yeah. My uncle had one, but he doesn't have the best judgment in the world. Sorry, Uncle Mike.
Poor Uncle Mike, getting such a tough time here on Corona TV. Let me tell you something else that happens on Corona TV. We do free consulting, and I am going to. You're going to get the invoice for this, which has a 0.00 tag, but it's all you. All I do is in my new role as a less suckier listener. I'm going to connect the dots between this idea of what you said at the beginning and what you said now. And I think there's something interesting about this idea of being not disconnected from your body, but disconnected from your brand, and actually thinking about it the same way, right? Which is the fact that it's almost an out of body type of experience, but this is really the issue, right? Isn't it? It's that there are executives and there are companies that have lost touch and cannot control. They lack the proprioception with respect to actually being able to understand height and weight and length and depth and heat and pain, and I think this probably is a really, really visual, rich way to think about the challenges in marketing right now.
I think you've absolutely nailed it. I mean, one of the things that has been a theme over the last year or two, actually, is talking to clients in context of sort of strategic road mapping or new product development, and having this concept be often stated outright in this way, which is we're uncomfortable with uncertainty, and the thing we want is certainty. And so one of the things that we have to kind of do is tear down that conception of the world, that there is certain uncertainty and there is certainty. There is uncertainty. There is not certainty. We live in a probabilistic universe. Nothing is certain. And so all we can do is kind of manage acceptable levels of risk. And what you want to do is get from uncertain, which is like the best metaphor I ever sort of read for this was uncertainty is is when, or rather like risk is you have a deck of playing cards and you know how many cards are in there, you know what kind of suits they are, you know how many of each suit, right? So you can start to calculate the risk of pulling any given card. Uncertainty is you have no idea what's inside that box. You don't know if there are cards in it or not. You don't know how many they are. You don't know what they look like. You know nothing about it. Most of the time, my clients are not actually living in a condition of uncertainty. It just feels like it. It feels like they don't know what's going on and they don't know what to do. And so the first thing we have to do is kind of migrate their mindset away from feeling like they're stuck in some kind of pit of despair, uncertainty, into, no, you're just in an experience of risk that's making you uncomfortable. And how do we get you from this high risk situation into something a little bit more manageable and more palatable? But we are never going to get you to certainty. It doesn't exist. So we have to just let go of that idea and stop reaching for it, because that's just not where you're not going to get there, and it's a waste of your energy and effort. And everything will seem like a disappointment in comparison to this mythical thing you'll never achieve.
Tom talks about, he says, I love talking about the gift of uncertainty, and whether or not you think about it as a gift. I also think, and it gets a little meta, but I think you can be certain about uncertainty. I think you can be comfortable about being uncomfortable. I have a visual in my mind. I always think about the perfect storm, the boat that is, almost on these waves that are almost tidal waves upon tidal waves, and you are completely not in control, and yet you have to just let go, and you have to, at that point, obviously before the big wave comes and kills you, but there is something about, even when you're out in the ocean, you've just got to lie on your back, and you've just got to go with the flow and recognize and almost embrace the fact that you're not in control, and that is hard.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And I think, if your experience of that is not just that there's a bit of a tide and a current, but there's an actual rip tide pulling you in a direction, the instinct is to fight. And the right thing to do is essentially to swim into and kind of away from it, not to clash with it, not to try to fight your way out, but to ride it out. And the problem is, the riptide was pretty violent to start with. It sucked you under for a second, and now you're in this panic mode. And so how do you get out of panic mode and get back into being present in what's happening and being able to hold open at least the hope that you can get out of this? And you're absolutely right. It requires a kind of letting go. And I see people are talking about Hindu wisdom here and that, and there's a lot of that in these. I sometimes talk about these workshops I do with clients as guided meditation, because that's sometimes what it feels like. It's a lot of getting them into their feelings and then getting them out of them again, because it's very easy to couch all of these decisions in balance sheets and stakeholders and stockholders, and often it's actually coming from a much more emotional experience than it is coming from a balance sheet.
Well, of course, one of the things that our clients, God bless them, do is they turn to focus groups and they turn to market research. And that's why, I dedicated my soliloquy, obviously inspired by you and in honor of you, about just thinking and riffing on the idea of truth and research and truth in advertising. And I know two books that you've been quite influenced by are the books The Lie Detectors and Brainwashed. And so I wanted to get your perspective in terms of how we find truth, how we uncover truth. But more importantly, I know that one of the biggest problems I ever had in my planning career was selective listening, and that clients would be only looking for insights or verbatims that ultimately reinforce their worldview, as opposed to challenging it, clashing it, and triangulating towards a better point of view. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that and in context of these two books.
Yeah, I think it's you're absolutely right about that kind of. I think of it as this sort of listening for experience that I think happens a lot in market research, which is, and I think it's actually reifying itself in the age of coronavirus, where we're all in these rectangles together all the time. And I've been in meetings over the course of this year where someone dials in to the Zoom call, turns their with their camera off, they're on mute, they're not participating. And if I had to guess, I would say that they're at best passively listening to what's going on in that meeting, and that the reason that they've dialed into it is that they need to be seen to be in it, as opposed to actually being in it. And I think the problem with that is it is exactly the kind of thing I used to experience with clients in the back room at focus group facilities, where they're there all day, they eat the M&Ms, they order the lunches, they do all of that stuff, but they're in front of their laptops, on their smartphones, checking email, doing other things, getting ready for the meetings tomorrow, occasionally popping out to get on to answer a call. And when they're there listening in the back room, they're not fully present. What they've done is picked a kind of thing they're listening for. And when that happens, they, pop up like a meerkat and go, oh yeah, well, there's validation of the thing I wanted to hear. And this is one of the problems of these kind of traditional methods of qualitative research, is that it's become this, I always talk about it as like, it's the horse's mouth problem. We want to hear consumers talk about our brands and our products and our experiences the way we talk about them. And so there's often a lot of resistance to anything that's actually being said in the room, because they're not using the language we want them to use. They're not acting the way we expected them to act based on our market segmentation, or they don't look right. Like I've literally had clients want to replace respondents because they don't like the way they look. And I think one of the things about the focus group facility is that mirror doesn't act like a mirror for the viewers. It acts like a screen. And so it creates this feeling of what I'm here is to watch the focus group show. And so if it's not sufficiently entertaining, or these people don't fit my expectations, or it doesn't go the way I was expecting, well, I don't like this show very much. It's boring, or these people are unlikable, or whatever. And so one of the things I had started to do was say, we're not going to use focus group facilities. We'll limit the number of clients who can come and observe them, and they'll be in the room with us. And yeah, you got to keep your mouth shut and listen, but it's much harder to be on your laptop and your iPhone, typing away, responding to emails back at the office, while this group of people are having a conversation about your campaign or your brand. And it's more likely that you will be a more active listener in it. And then I always give them opportunities to ask questions. But the thing I found over time is that that's also really a tricky proposition, that clients aren't very good at just asking questions. They want to coach the witness, they want to lead the witness, and they want to pitch. They want to try to sell you on their idea. And that's not the exercise in these rooms. And so I have kind of come to the conclusion that I think there's a time and a place for a focus group. I think if you have a really good facilitator, they can be great. I think a lot goes into how you recruit, how you set up the room, how you set up the exercises, what you do, how much time you have, how many people are there. Like a lot goes into the design of it. And then having a great facilitator really makes a difference. But I don't think most brands should be doing them anymore, to be honest.
Do you think now in 2020, because, focus group is still and it's almost like the way things were. I think we've moved on considerably as an industry. But now in 2020, I wonder, are we regressing by thinking about, well, hey, wait a second, why don't we do focus groups using Zoom? Or in fact, could that represent, just like when we think about education, just like when we think about even giving a keynote presentation or conference, is there actually an interesting pivot for research, market research, using virtual and using Zoom and similar products?
So I think there is. I think the thing I've always felt about group dynamics versus, say, one-on-one interviews or something more asynchronous like digital diaries is that you should pick the method to suit the objectives of the research, and also to suit the kind of context of the decisions that the consumer is making. And so if it makes sense to have them in a group of people, then have them in a group of people. But if it doesn't make sense, this isn't a decision they make with, thinking about what their neighbors say, then why are we creating this odd sort of gathering that kind of creates some, I mean, sort of that instrument effect of the instrument itself is influencing the outcomes of and what people are doing under observation. So that is the first thing I think about. I think, you can have these group conversations in tools like Zoom and other platforms that are out there. There are tons of them now. Again, it's down to how good at facilitating are you and how many people are in the room. And I think one of the things I've found with a lot of clients is, to the extent that they prefer focus groups, what they like is that you can talk to lots of people at once. And so they're trying to get, I've had clients use this term that I absolutely fucking hate, but it's quali-quant. It's like, can I get a lot of people in a qual environment?
Quali-quant? Is that like a push me, pull you?
It's just a thing I hate. I don't know what it is.
Someone needs to put $1 into the into the quali-quant jar.
Yes.
Joey Dumont says ad agencies use research like drunks use a lamppost more for support than illumination. Now, I almost went with that David Ogilvy quote for your quote, but I went with something else, which definitely brought a smile to my face. Statistics can be misleading. The average human being has one breast and one testicle. That is a statistical fact. Did you know that?
Yes.
And
yes.
And normally I would say, do you know who said that? But it's some, I don't know, spineless person, because the origins are unknown. Maybe I should say I did, but that's like Bob Garfield, right? 50% of the population is dumber than the other half. It's a statistical fact.
Yes.
So Farrah, tell us about these books. Why are these books influential to you, and how have they informed you in your own evolution?
Yeah, so this was a funny little rabbit hole that I went down after reading Jill Lepore's book, The Secret History of Wonder Woman.
Wow.
So William Moulton Marston, who's one of the creators of Wonder Woman, the original comic books, was an interesting guy. He was a psychologist and a lawyer, and was one of the early inventors of the lie detector, the polygraph machines. There were several people working on them kind of concurrently, but he was one of the first ones. And there's just kind of this throwaway mention in a chapter about how one of the ways he was making money was using his lie detector to test movies for, I think, Paramount Pictures. And came up with all kinds of really wonky conclusions about blondes, brunettes, and redheads having different, physiological arousal responses to different kinds of actors or scenes. It was not great science. But this obsession with lie detection feels like a very American thing. For one thing, we've been using lie detectors for a variety of purposes, and obviously in the criminal justice context, but also even in employment in some places. And this just was not a feature of Europe until more recently.
Bachelorette, very important. The Bachelor and the Bachelorette.
Right.
Very
Yes.
good use case.
Yes. And so, Googling around, I found this book, The Lie Detectors, and read that one, which really goes into detail about these men really who were devising these lie detectors. And the main thing that's about them, right, about the lie detector as an idea is just this idea that a lot of the time people are lying, and that we can somehow detect the lie through some physiological response. And so obviously the early days of it, it's, well, we'll strap this thing around you and we'll measure your heart rate, and, we'll put caps on your head and measure EEG response to things. Like, there's all kinds of little devices that were tried in order to figure out, some sort of universal physiological tell for when people were lying. It's a crazy book. It's fascinating stories. There's a whole thing in here about kind of modern sort of police as invented by some people out of Berkeley, and crazy people inventing devices. But that book then led me to the book Brainwashed. Again, I think through just sort of Google searching, or maybe Amazon recommended it as a good next read. I was interested in it because I think it's written by lawyers as well as neuroscientists. But the thing is, like, fMRI, other kinds of brain scanning technologies have been the new lie detectors for, again, trying to find some universal physiological response that happens when we lie. And so, I had long sort of wondered about what this book refers to as blobology, which are these kind of images of the brain where there's like this part of your brain is bright red and this part of your brain is blue, and that's supposed to tell us something about what's going on in the brain. And the truth is, like, this is a very nascent area of science. There's not a lot of, first of all, universality in physiological response around lying or any other kind of thought process. It varies by culture. It varies by person. It's very individuated. Some people have high stress responses. Some people don't have any stress responses at all. So it's hard to kind of say, oh, well, you can tell that someone's lying to you because they're not making direct eye contact. That is not a tell. It's just not. It's not a universal tell. It might be for some people, but not something that's generalizable. And the reason that this is interesting to me is just that I keep having these conversations around traditional market research methods where it's like, well, is this self-reported data, or do you have some way to verify X? Now, X, more often than not in my work, is people's opinions, which are themselves not facts. They are stories people have constructed for themselves about how they feel about a thing. And the story itself is important, but we have this sort of idea that it's not important because it's constructed. And that if we could just get down to the moment when the synapse fires, that's where the truth will be revealed. And so there's a third book that I forgot to mention. I think it's called How Emotions Are Made. And it is a book that basically says the actual experience of emotions in the human brain is a narrative one, that our brains are built to regulate our bodies, salt, sugar, fat, that sort of thing. But it also recognizes, it's a pattern recognition machine. And so what it does with those patterns is starts to say, I think next time I see these patterns, this will be true. And it does that so that it can regulate the body. It can tell you whether to freak out or to calm down, to run or to stand your ground. All of those kinds of things are what the brain is trying to tell your body how to regulate itself. And so it's looking for patterns and telling itself stories so that it can make sense of the world that we live in. So that's the actual truth of the emotional response to things, is the story we tell ourselves about the thing we're reacting to. And if we try to extract the story, we're no closer to the truth. We're actually a million miles away from it.
It's so fascinating, because I think, obviously one of the messages there, one of the takeaways is that the more we try and quant the qual and quanti qual as opposed to quali quant, the more we're going to actually end up in an undesirable scenario where we've tried to create something that, again, is so certain, and it isn't, because we are flawed. We are perfectly imperfect human beings, and our decisions are not always predictable and not always rational. We are not robots. I think there's a beautiful thread that goes throughout this whole conversation. I wanted to just touch on two thoughts and then just give people a little, if you didn't have enough incentive to come to the Zoom after show and hang out with the unbelievably insightful Farrah Bostic, well, we're going to talk maybe about one of the subjects we didn't get to, which is politics and trying to understand polling and how shocking it is when it comes to that kind of research. But we're going to go to the Zoom after show in just a moment. I just wanted to touch on two things. One, the problem with quali-quant or quanti-qual, besides it being an idiotic statement, and the people that say it are bigger idiots, sorry, clients out there, is the fact that I think when we try and be all things to all people and want the best of both worlds, we end up with nothing. So this is a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. Or maybe I should say, what's the word I'm looking for? A nut. What was the bird?
A nuthatch.
A nuthatch in the hand is worth two in the bush. The other thing that I had to just touch on before we kind of wind up is this idea of, you said, there are people who want to be seen being in it versus being in it. I mean, that is a life lesson, if I've ever heard one, about that can apply across the board. Just showing up isn't just, doing the bare minimum. You've either got, life is too short not to be all in. And I think that's a clear takeaway about sitting on the periphery, on the edges, being a spectator, doing the bare minimum. That's not going to get you to that human consumer insight and truth that can, as I said, move mountains build businesses and build brands. In the few moments we have left, I want people to know how to stay connected with you. One of the things is you have an amazing newsletter, which is just called Stoked, and people can subscribe to Stoked. I'm going to actually place a little link in the comment thread right now. In the latest issue, you talk about something that I'd never heard of before called the Beige Book. And I really loved how, I mean, this is your quote, "There is no more graceful description and justification for the use of qualitative data that I've ever come across." So as I do go and post that link, tell people a little bit about the newsletter, about the company, about the difference engine, and also about the Beige Book.
Yeah. So the difference engine is where you can find me. We work with, as I said, clients to help them make big decisions. We do that through kind of, in a way, it's kind of coaching workshops, strategic consulting, and then we do a lot of primary qualitative custom research as well. The latest thing that we'll be launching in January is a project we did to understand kind of decision-making value systems that people have. So we did a 1,600 person nationwide survey. We did about 30 digital diaries, and really have kind of uncovered two main, maybe as many as four kind of decision-making value systems that seem to guide how people think about themselves as decision makers and figure out what drives their own decisions. And I think the interesting thing is when people bring those decision-making styles together in the workplace, that's where a lot of this stress and desire for more certainty, I think, actually happens. It's these clash of value systems. So look out for that. We'll be announcing that in January. The newsletter is called Stoked. It comes out irregularly because there's only two of us and it takes a while to put it together and do it well. The most recent one is about the Beige Book. The Beige Book is, I think I learned about it 2 or 3 years ago. The Beige Book is put out by the Federal Reserve 8 times a year, and it is free. You can get it online. It's not particularly long. It's not a hard read. It is entirely built out of formal and informal interviewing and conversations that folks at the various Federal Reserve districts conduct with economic actors in their district to get a feel for how things are going on the ground. And it's just incredibly rich with insight and seems to actually have a pretty good, it's not meant to be a prediction tool, but people are able to use it to predict changes to GDP, for example, and markets seem to move more on the Beige Book than they do on the non-farm labor reports. So it is a valuable piece of information. It's only about 40 years old, but it's all free online at the Federal Reserve's website, and I highly recommend it if you want to get a feel for kind of what's happening economically around the country.
And I highly recommend following Farrah Bostic on Twitter, connecting with her on LinkedIn, finding out more about her and her company, The Difference Engine, and obviously subscribing to Stoke. And you have a link in the comments below. Farrah, I think it's even better when we can see each other versus just hearing each other. There are a lot more nerves and a lot more sensory aspects in play. It's been, I've been looking forward to having you on the show for a long time. And the good news is we get to continue it for just a wee bit longer through our Zoom after show. So thank you for coming in. And in the immortal words of the arbiter of of whether I have a great guest or not, Mr. Chuck Norris.
You are Chuck Norris approved.
See you guys tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Corona TV with your host, multiple author, and global keynote speaker, Joseph Jaffe. Corona TV is the show about hope, positivity, optimism, and if there's time left over, a little bit of marketing. The after show on Zoom starts right now at bit.ly/Corona TV After Show. If you like the show, tell a friend or two. Please subscribe to the show at CoronaTV.show. And if you want to get inside news, previews of upcoming guests, and much more, text Corona TV to 66866 or visit josephjaffe.com/subscribe to sign up for the show's newsletter.
And despite the best ministrations of your wife, you still look ugly.